Hello everyone and welcome back to A Year in the TikTok of FatSapphicBro. Now, funny thing, we actually left off on November 7th of 2021. So we are, at this point, over a year that we have to look at FatSapphicBro. Now, part of this is just because they post a fucking shit ton, because I don't think that they have anything else really going on in their lives. From what I understand, from what we've seen, they largely stay in their living space, and their partner is the one that goes and takes care of everything except for maybe some doctor's appointments. And they care for, like, their grandmother, but it seems like they still have a fair amount of, like, free time available. So that makes it hard to catch up. Also, all of their citation of bullshit studies, like 98% of the time, I think they maybe have had one legitimate resource posted once. It takes a while to get through their stuff, so I'm going to start trying to condense some of my tangents, and some of the stuff that we've already gone over in the past, I might start to skip over some, just so that way we don't end up in this perpetual, like, it gets further and further, and before you know it, we're looking at 2 years in the TikTok of FatSapphicBro, because they post so much I can't keep up with it. Also, part of the reason for this is that I just posted one on Christmas. So, about once a month is about all I can handle of them. So, we're going to at least try to catch up and maybe get like a month and a half in each video, so that way eventually we'll reach an end. But anyway, we left off on this hypertension one, so we're going to start here, and let's just jump into it.
This person asked, is a grandparent having alcohol-induced type 2 diabetes in later life genetic predisposition? I've been told not to worry, might be challenging that. From my understanding, no, that is not the same as a genetic predisposition. If they got type 2 diabetes specifically from...
Alright, we're not going to watch any more of this, mostly because I don't really want to get into whatever they're about to say. The only thing I do want to comment on, though, is why is this person coming to FatSapphicBro as like some sort of medical authority? And FatSapphicBro is kind of taking it. If anything, they should have led with, I'm not a medical professional, but to my understanding, XYZ. They might end this with talk to your doctor. I don't know, and I don't care, but the very fact that they are answering this at all, they say that they're not a doctor and they've never claimed to be a doctor, yet right here, what they are doing is giving medical advice that they have no formal educational background in. And I have a problem with that. Now, last summer, I did that whole copyright thing with my understanding of copyright law. And I explained in that video that I am not a lawyer. I said that a couple of times. I'm not a lawyer. I had a class in contract reading, and that's about the extent of it. But I was also really interested in copyright law, and so based on my layman's understanding of copyright law, this was my understanding of it. And at the very least, even if you don't have to outline everything in that regard, but this really should have been led with, I am not a medical professional. I do not have any sort of degree or job experience in genetic predisposition and genetic contributions to ongoing diseases. And yet they just start talking about it as if they're an authority. I don't know. It just bugs me.
This comment was on a video about PCOS being a hormonal intersex condition.
A lot of you had some strong feelings about this one, and that it was very much not an intersex hormonal condition. I hear you, I see you, and I want to make sure that it's known that a lot of the people in the comments with PCOS have said that they don't believe that it is an intersex condition, that it's kind of, to say that it's an intersex condition kind of erases a little bit of the general variations in testosterone levels and hormone fluctuations in women. I just want to put that out there. The comment also reads, I reckon people took so long to admit this because PCOS is so common, this knowledge would blow the binary out of the water entirely. And the thing is, before we even get into this, I think that there's this weird need to label everything with like exact definitions and with this kind of very narrow viewpoint, when most things biologically, in my experience and just from what I've seen as a very like cursory look at biological phenomena that you see when you're poking around the internet, it's that like most things exist on a spectrum of some sort, and the line between different categories can blur significantly. So I think to try to turn this into it's actually removed from a completely different category into another, but that's still a spectrum, it just kind of feels, especially with FatSapphicBro, I can't help but be like, this is a bid to have another label, essentially. Specifically for FatSapphicBro. I'm not saying everyone that thinks this has this issue, but for FatSapphicBro specifically, I really feel like they try very hard to be a label collector. Like, it's important to them, their especially since they like to use their identities as a shield from criticism, and they like to use their identities for some reason as a form of authority when speaking on completely unrelated matters. But let's hear what they have to say.
And this person says in response to that, I reckon people took so long to admit this because PCOS is so common, this knowledge would blow the binary out of the water entirely. And all I have to say is ding, 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 you're right. That's exactly it. The real fucking reason we can't consider PCOS and similar hormonal conditions as an intersex condition is because cis people would lose their fucking mind.
Okay, so this feels a little conspiracy theory-esque to me, that like you think there's some big conspiracy to hide hormonal conditions with, I guess, within the binary, I guess is what they're claiming, because to protect like cis people's fragile egos. It just feels like a big stretch. And again, this feels like, and I'm gonna keep harping on this with FatSapphicBro because it's a big fucking pet peeve of mine, and that is that it seems like every time they bring up any sort of, it's not even an identifier, this is just like a medical condition that they're trying to connect to an identifier, and it always feels like it does it with the ultimate goal to be viewed as a victim or oppressed or maybe special in some way. I want to hear the rest of what they have to say for this particular video, but I'm really getting like I'm oppressed by the evil cis. It's kind of like creating something out of nothing to me in this particular instance.
At how much that would blow open the reality that the binary is entirely fucking made up. Everyone wants to pretend like sex is not just as made up as gender, but it is. It is still something that human beings chose to group together specific symptoms or what have you and call it a specific thing. We made,
because that's categorization. Okay, I'm sorry. No, I'm gonna have to interject here. That's called categorization, my friend. It's what helps us make sense of our world. This is kind of I don't do categorization in the scientific biological sense, but in terms of categorizing information, classifying information as a way to make it easier to access that information is necessary. And part of me almost wanted to say necessary evil, but I don't think it's an evil. I think it's just an imperfect system. There is no classification system anywhere on Earth that can accommodate everything perfectly. You end up fudging things here and there. You end up like hedging your bets and making a guess on a lot of things, because the way humans work, there is new stuff coming out every time. There are new words, there are new forms of media. There's new topics that were not like a consideration before that come constantly, and you have to figure out how to classify that stuff. Gender and sex is one of those things where, yes, it is classified, but that doesn't mean that, okay, here's the thing. It's made up in the way that all information is made up, in that it is imperfect language to describe an imperfect mechanism in nature or in the human consciousness or what have you. It's an imperfect system to classify those imperfect properties in a way to help us make sense of them. To try to put it in this purely theoretical, I really hate people that do this, that try to shove everything into this theoretical, rhetorical framework that doesn't graft onto reality, as well as the imperfect, non-rhetorical, not as theoretical forms of the information. I like to call it arguing rhetoric versus reality. That's what FatSapphicBro is doing with this. Yes, classification, they took these different identifiers, these different markers of differences between men and women and anyone in between, and yeah, it's an imperfect system. But if you had, for someone who says they are a master's level researcher, you'd think that you would understand, I would think that you would have to use a database system, a cataloging system, a library system, so you would I would think that you would be able to recognize that classification systems are inherently imperfect and will always be that way, simply because that's the way our world is. Nothing can easily be classified 100% of the time. I'm sorry, I'm trying to rein back my tangents, but goddamn, this bugged me.
It's not real. So, yeah, I think the biggest reason there's so much pushback from anybody about PCOS being considered an intersex condition in any regard is because people are super, super intersex phobic and transphobic, and there's way too...
Once again, couching it in a form of oppression against them. I need to point that out. Couching it in a way that makes them a victim. And also this, it's all made up. In case you haven't noticed, everything is made up. Reality itself is made up if you try hard enough, because it's all about perception, meaning that no human can have an objective view of reality, because everything is colored by our own individual perceptions, which come with a level of illusion for everyone based on who you are, and you may not even realize it. That's why we have internal biases. All of that can be wrapped up based on your perception of reality, and your perception is your reality, even though it's not objective. I hope that makes sense, but everything is made up if you try hard enough. And while I enjoy theoretical discussions and stuff, I think reducing everything like this into, well, that's just made up, it's just made up, ignores the reason why we put those systems in place in the first place. And I think it would be better to discuss the theoretical underpinnings of those categorizations and how maybe to modernize them if need be, or how to add on to it, which I tend to prefer. In order, and the way that we kind of do, like instead of male and female as we do now, there is, like, we have words like gender fluid and non-binary. And those additions help with changing the perception of reality for all. I tend to prefer that way of adding to our understanding and adding to the ways that we classify our world. But to say something is just made up is just wholly overly reductive in my mind.
Many cis women are afraid that being defined as intersex takes away from their inherent womanhood and their identity as a woman. And it is so frustrating because it's like they're this close to understanding the whole fucking thing, but they can't see it because they're just stuck. And I wish I could give them a nice gentle push right there, because it's that close.
That whole last part just irritated the shit out of me, so let's just move on.
This person says, I feel like I'm dumb for saying this, but can you say more? I'm this close to understanding, but I don't get it, and I want to. Definitely. First of all, not dumb at all. Second of all, yeah, let's dive into this a little bit more. Okay, so intersex people make up somewhere around like 1.7% of the population. Excuse me. And folks with PCOS, about the same percentage. So if folks with PCOS were considered intersex, that means the intersex population would literally double as soon as that was declared, which would make the intersex population a lot harder to ignore. Right now, a lot of the shitty rhetoric among the cis community is that, intersex people are such a small part of the population. But if people with PCOS are considered intersex, we are no longer a small part of the population. It starts to become much more significant, and it starts to become much more difficult to ignore the fact that the sex and gender binary are entirely fucking made up. And I think...
Again, though, I have an issue with, one, the over-reduction of everything being made up. The whole gender binary is made up, everything is made up, and I mean, if you want to argue it on a purely theoretical basis, it is made up, but I think a better interpretation of this is that it is an imperfect system that we use to classify the difference between sexes. And in modern times, we've recognized that there's a spectrum of differences between the sexes. And, I mean, there's more to say there. But my bigger issue is that people keep coming to FatSapphicBro like they're an authority on this. That's my bigger issue, quite frankly, more than and they accept that role. They accept the role because they love being an authority on information while simultaneously couching it in their oppression. And it just drives me up the fucking wall.
The point that, really, really gets to me is that cis women are very upset about not getting to be considered women if this happens. And it's like, a lot of these folks tend to be very
So before we get into that, I also want to say that I feel like it's... I wish I could remember. Unfortunately, it was a month ago, and I know some people had some really interesting comments to say in the last video about that whole perception of PCOS being an intersex condition. But even just taking their framework, saying that they think that PCOS should be considered an intersex condition, isn't that in and of itself creating a binary of... you're a woman unless you have PCOS, in that case you're intersex. And there's a very on-off switch quality to this, when couldn't it, in fact, be a spectrum? I mean, if you're going to say it's made up, then let's look at it for what it is, given that if we're going to try to classify PCOS as an intersex condition, wouldn't it be better to classify it as a spectrum condition, in which case both those with females can have PCOS and intersex people can have PCOS? Wouldn't that be an option? Keep in mind, I'm gonna just clarify here. I still don't have a whole lot of information, and I'm not working with a wealth of information on intersex. My understanding is still very basic, and this is more arguing of classification than whether PCOS is truly an intersex condition or not. I'm just arguing for classification purposes. Because I find it hypocritical that they're like, oh, the gender binary is made up, but then yet they're trying to classify PCOS as an intersex condition in this sort of on-off binary way, rather than viewing it as the spectrum that they've been advocating for recognition of sex and gender differences. And it just seems hypocritical to me.
Phobic, right? They don't understand that your gender is entirely internal and has nothing to do with your body. And so often cis folks are really turfy and very anti-trans, and yet...
Okay, this is just turning into I'm so oppressed again, and I just... We've only gone a day and we're 20 minutes in. I've been recording for 20 minutes. We're moving on.
This person says this is probably also why research for these conditions aren't funded 100%.
Actually, I'm going to offer an opposing viewpoint here. The way that it works, that I've seen it work, I'm not going to say the way that it works because I don't genuinely know the way that it works, but my perception is that part of the reason why stuff like PCOS and endometriosis aren't research isn't funded for them, is similar to the way that like PMDD isn't funded very well, in that if people aren't having issues with PCOS and like endometriosis to the point where they can't reproduce, then it's not seen as really a priority for research. A lot of women's reproductive health funding focuses on the reproductive part rather than the struggles of everyday life for women with those reproductive issues. And it's kind of it's treated as a, well, it's not impacting your ability to get pregnant, therefore we're not going to worry about it, sort of thing. And the reason why I say that, I don't have a whole lot of experience looking at funding for PCOS or PMD, or not PMDD, but endometriosis, but I have looked at like the funding for PMDD because I have PMDD, and the treatment options fucking suck and aren't. I'm one of the, I think it's like 40% of women that doesn't respond to either of the two treatment forms that are currently available. And so I think there's a lot of issues around getting funding to research these conditions. I don't think that the top of that is the idea that PCOS is actually an intersex condition and therefore people are transphobic and just don't want to say. I think that's a bit of a leap to make when there's several factors working here that contribute to these conditions not being funded for research.
Because PCOS predominantly affects women and those assigned female at birth, they don't want to research it. They don't care about us. Research is predominantly done on cis het white men, thin ones at that, and healthy ones.
So, like, yes, kind of. There's a kernel here where it does feel a little bit like women's issues are kind of swept under the rug, but I still stand by what I said before about if it doesn't seem to be like a huge contributing factor to miscarriages or failing pregnancies, then it's not given priority.
So yeah. Not much else to say there, but thanks for adding this. This person says, wait, so what about things similar like endometriosis specifically? Because I Googled and I'm confused now. Excuse me. Okay, so I have seen in at least one comment from somebody where they said endo/PCOS. So it seems like endometriosis is also considered a hormonal intersex condition. Again, I am not an expert on this. This is just what I have seen in the community being.
Well, at least for once, they put the disclaimer they're not an expert. I think, though, that even just their wording of this also seems to be a hormonal intersex condition, as though the idea that PCOS is a hormonal intersex condition is a foregone conclusion at this point, when in fact it is still very much being discussed and there are plenty of detractors for it. We saw that in the last video, how it's not something that they just completely came up with on their own, but it's not a foregone conclusion either, like they're treating it. This is an ongoing apparent debate in the women's reproductive health sphere.
Discussed and talked about. It is something I am personally researching for myself, but from what I can tell, endo also counts as a hormonal intersex condition. I hope this helps. Please let me know if you have any other. This person says, I'm sorry, can you go back to the basics and explain what hormonal intersex means? So basically, with PCOS, we don't necessarily have different looking genitals.
So, before we even get into this, from the sound of it, they are explaining their interpretation of what hormonal intersex means. That's what this whole video is going to be about. We're not going to watch the rest of it because I'd rather just move on, but I would like to once again comment on the fact that people keep coming to FatSapphicBro for clarifications and definitions of medical terminology which they do not have any formal education or any formal credentials for. And while on occasion they will give a disclaimer, they still tend to answer all of these questions with a sense of authority and only very rarely give the disclaimer that they're not actually a medical professional. And this whole thing is part of the reason why that whole I never claimed to be a medical professional. I never claimed to be. No, but people keep coming to you as though you are an authority, and then you take their questions and act as though you are an authority. And it's concerning, and people that can see this are like, what the fuck are you doing? And I think it's completely valid. So, we're moving on.
This person asks, would you be open to talking more about how being fat ties into gender identity? You know, it's so new for me, so this is like a really recent development. Star Gremlin and I were chit-chatting in some comments, and they mentioned feeling like their gender identity is super tied into being fat. And it was a light bulb moment for me, because I'm like, yeah, there's so much about, I think because I am like morbidly obese, and I'm over 400 pounds, right? So like people treat me like I'm not a person, and like I am an object or a thing, and a blob.
So I would just like to cut in here. I'm not going to deny that they've never experienced things like that, because I'm sure that they have. There are people that can be very cruel and very rude in terms of how people look. But I've also seen them use this. They're calling me a thing, a blob, and towards people that never did such a thing. Like we saw with that whole copyright striking bullshit that they did last summer, where it's like they purposefully misgender me and send their people to come and harass me and bullshit. Like they have a habit of spewing lies that frame them in the form as a victim. So while it's not that I don't think that they've never experienced that, there's also a how often does that really happen given how you frame things before.
And there's just so much. I mean, since I was a kid, I've been fat literally my entire life. Like, there are pictures of me at 2 years old, and I'm a chunky little bitch. And I've just been acutely aware my entire life that boys don't like fat girls. And so being fat has always directly tied in to every aspect of my life, because kids were not great to me, and so often we are othered and we are seen as not people or as different people. And so many people, especially within the alphabet mafia community, don't like fat people. There is so much fat phobia. So we are really othered and treated as like things to be hated, and as objects and not people.
Okay, I'm gonna have to move on, because this seems to be nothing more than a I'm oppressed, pity me sort of video. Like, I can see how the being fatter makes you feel like, if as someone who was born a girl who identifies as a cis woman, like, to a certain extent, I do understand the idea of, like, you're fat and therefore you're less feminine. Like, I do understand that feeling. That being said, I think that this is taking it to, like, the nth degree of, okay, so that made me feel bad, so I've been oppressed. And it's just this constant I'm oppressed shit with FatSapphicBro, and it just drives me a little nutty.
This commenter says, actually, cardiovascular diseases are sexy and don't define my worth as a human 1000%. Demonizing illnesses demonizes disabled and chronically ill people. That is ableism. We don't like.
So no one is demonizing those with cardiovascular disease. The idea of obesity is tied to cardiovascular disease means that it's a fully preventable illness. And this is one time where I am going to put in a little bit of a morality argument, in that I think that you have a moral obligation as a member of society. So no one is saying that those with cardiovascular disease are immoral by any means. The general argument is that as someone who is fully capable of preventing some of these issues, you should do your best as a member of society, as a member of the general populace to make efforts for yourself so you don't take up more medical resources from those that had no control over whether they got those diseases or not. Because there is a level of, there's a bit of a spectrum in these diseases, in that there are some that no matter what you do, you ended up getting it anyway, and that happens. But then there's the cases, and a lot of cases, where it's like, this could have been prevented. And it's that this could have been prevented crowd, where they're like, fuck you, I don't care, you should accept me for who I am. It's not about accepting you for who you are. It's a matter of these medical treatments, as we've seen with stuff like Ozempic and stuff, can be very limited, and it's important that they get to the people that need them. And that's part of the reason why I am against using Ozempic as a weight loss drug, because first and foremost, it's for those with diabetes. And much in that vein, you taking the different medications for these different cardiovascular diseases that could have been prevented had you ate right and exercised is an issue. And yet there is a little bit of a morality argument here, but it is about not consuming the resources that could have been prevented from you consuming them, simply had you made taken basic actions to prevent it.
This person says, thank you, I needed this. Do you have any advice on dealing with doctor's appointments for diabetes? They are trying to push weight loss on me. So I've talked to this person a little bit and also got permission to do a video for this response, because this person is hoping that this is helpful for other people as well. So if I were you, what I would do is I would start to make the lifestyle changes that I talk about in some of my other videos that will help start managing your diabetes. And I would keep...
This is fucking medical advice. No, I don't care what videos you made about lifestyle changes to help with it. You are not a fucking doctor. What the fuck are you doing? So rather than tell them to listen to their doctor and work towards the weight loss, which is what the doctor recommends, you're gonna push your lifestyle changes, basically your medical diet, like prescription for their condition, when you are not a licensed medical professional. I don't see how you can say, I've never said I was a doctor. This is you prescribing a medical regimen to someone with diabetes without a license. I'm surprised you haven't been sued yet.
Track of these lifestyle changes that you're making. Like in writing, have something written down where you're like, this is what I do about, food consumption, or this is what I do about exercise, this is what I do about what have you. And really start keeping track of the lifestyle changes that you are making to better your diabetes. And making those changes will start to improve your diabetes. I don't know if...
That's a bold claim to make. Making the lifestyle changes that I put forth, not that your doctor said, but that I put forth, will help. It, we even talk about how everybody's different and reacts to different things. You can't guarantee that your lifestyle changes will positively contribute to controlling their diabetes. You can't say that. And furthermore, you're not a fucking doctor. You're not a fucking doctor. Just because it helped you doesn't mean that it's gone through several stages of research as to being able to scientifically say this should statistically help your diabetes. Oh my god, I'm so fucking irritated.
They have you on a medication to help you manage your blood sugar yet, but if they don't, they probably should, because that can be a really big help as well, especially in the beginning when you're diabetic, to be taking some kind of medication that helps. At one point, I was on 3 different blood sugar controlling medications. I now am on one that I take every day, and I do very well with it, and it helps a lot. And I would continue to, when the doctors push weight loss, say, no, I am not interested in losing weight. I am interested in making healthy lifestyle changes that I have already began to implement, and I would like to continue to treat my diabetes through these lifestyle management techniques along with medication and see how that goes. Because more than likely, if you make the necessary lifestyle adjustments, your diabetes will start to improve, and then they should stop harassing you about weight loss. Now, that's not always a guarantee. I still sometimes get harassed about how I need to lose weight. I was told by my OBGYN that the way that I eat, which is small, like really small, frequent meals, is not good for diabetes management because it can blah, 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 which my
Holy fuck, the disrespect towards someone that knows a lot. Like, she's not, the person didn't, I mean, holy fuck. They weren't even saying that you just eat too much, which is bad for your diet. They're saying the way in which you eat isn't very good for diabetes control. Just because you've been able to finagle something that, like, you haven't, I mean, FatSapphicBro is only, I think at the time of this, 35. So, yeah, they're starting to see some effects, but it gets worse with time. I just, the fucking audacity. The audacity. I'm having a hard time verbalizing my outrage even because, holy fuck.
Response was, okay, then why has my A1C gone from way up here to way down here in the normal range? Why is my diabetes getting better if I'm eating poorly? To which she just kind of chuckled and had nothing to say because she's a fucking idiot.
Holy fuck. No, honey. She laughed and just because she realized she wasn't going to be able to convince you of anything because you believe yourself to be smarter than the professionals. I cannot, like, there's only a few seconds that I cannot finish. Holy fuck. The condescension. I don't see how they can view themselves as so much of a victim when they behave this way. They are arrogant. They are condescending. And quite frankly, they're an asshole. I don't like calling people names, but FatSapphicBro is someone that I fucking despise. Because they play doctor, they call, like, actual doctors idiots when they're trying to give medical advice. They believe they are smarter than the doctors despite no significant medical education. Holy fuck. Oh my god.
This person says the term morbidly obese literally means if this person does not lose weight, their premature death is going to be caused directly by their weight issue. I think it's an accurate term, to which I said, then you clearly don't know jack shit about health or fatness, with a laugh emoji, because obviously they don't. And of course, it's always another person that is in our community that harasses fat people. Because fat phobia within the Alphabet Mafia community is so rampant. And I'm so sick of people.
But that is the definition of morbid obesity. Is that you are, I'm sorry, no, you can't be over 400 pounds and not experience a heightened risk of premature death. It's a numbers thing. Like, this isn't even saying, like, you eat too much. We're saying that the weight, I mean, they're saying that the weight that you are is linked statistically to a higher chance of premature death. This is just a numbers game for that term. Aura Lay Christine had made a comment in my last video pointing out kind of an unfair take, which I agreed with, in that I had said there seems to be a tie with personality of those that are really fat to the point of having, like, mobile disabilities and a victimhood sort of complex, and I think I maybe tied entitlement in there. And I agreed that was a little bit of an overgeneralization, and I would like to make a couple of points and clarifications on my viewpoint. I do think that there is a type of personality that is prone to overindulgence and yet simultaneously has an entitlement and a victim complex. It's not exclusive just to fat people. I've seen it with, you can see it with Karens, you can see it with, like, some drug addicts. It's not all encompassing, but I have noticed this trend in this certain personality type, and I believe FatSapphicBro kind of fits this personality type to a T, where there is this insane level of victimhood where they can't take responsibility for anything in their lives, and it seems to be linked to a level of overindulgence. And we're looking at, I've noticed this is a fairly common personality type in the FAs, and so I can't help but wonder, is the FA movement really about fat acceptance, or is it about this certain personality type that's latched onto their fatness as an identifier that desperately just wants to be coddled? I don't know. It's a narrow subset of people, but I think that that type of personality is overly represented in the FA community specifically. And I don't know. I'd like your viewpoints on this, because I feel like there's something to be said about this common personality. I don't know, paradigm, trait, what have you. And I really feel like FatSapphicBro specifically exemplifies this. It's fucking insane.
That are supposed to be peers. We're supposed to be in this fight for equality together, being so anti-fat and so fat-phobic and so stuck in their garbage that they choose to come after more marginalized people in their own community. It's really upsetting for me as a transgender person and as somebody who uses they, them pronouns exclusively, that I am constantly attacked by people in my own community. Like, you should understand allyship. You should understand.
It's hard to be an ally to someone that tries to find oppression at every turn. There's a difference between allyship for a marginalized community and allyship for an individual. And sometimes allyship for an individual just is unreasonable. And I think, again, FatSapphicBro is a pretty good representation of when it is unreasonable, because they take everything to the nth degree and will find oppression in every sentence you say. All that person did was define morbid obesity and said it's an accurate term, and it is, statistically speaking. And I know I'm not finishing many of their videos in this. It's just, I feel like I've reached a level of I can't tolerate this bullshit anymore. And I feel like all they're going to do is just go on for the next minute or so about how they're oppressed, and I'm just not really interested in entertaining it. So we're going to move on. But there's just, we're only at November 12th. We started at November 8th. Or no, November 7th. And we're only at November 12th. This is how much they post. And just looking at, from those, 4 or 5 days, it's been a constant pity party.
Disabled. For real. You have to have a doctor fill out a piece of paper, a form, and give to the DMV to get one of these happy little things that say I'm a fucking wheelchair user. Because I'm actually disabled. I'm just disabled and fat because, whoo, surprise, that exists sometimes.
Okay, but, like, in FatSapphicBro's case, part of the reason why they're a wheelchair user is likely because they are over 400 pounds. Let's be honest. Part of the reason, at least part of the reason, is probably because you're too fat for your body to be able to hold you up.
This person's full comments say, can we abolish this idea that anyone owes the public health, even if that were a consistent and measurable metric? Why should your level of respect be determined by how much life you have left? If I have 50 years or 3 weeks or 2 minutes left, I should still be treated as a person. Absolutely.
Okay, so here's the thing with that idea that you owe the public health. It's not so much that you... I don't know if I would go so far as to say that you owe the public health. I would say that it's not even a matter of doing everything you can to be as healthy as possible, but it's a matter of not engaging in self-destructive behaviors. the public in general tends to look down on self-destructive behaviors, whether this be smoking, vaping, drug use, binge drinking, or, in the case of the fat acceptance group, eating massive quantities of food. And part of the reason for this is that can be an overconsumption of resources in terms of the medical problems that any of those overindulgences can cause. But also, it makes you less, for lack of a better term, a less productive member of society. And people tend to get fixated on equal contributions based on ability. And, like, we don't expect, like, for example, we're just going to use, like, a general chore outline. But let's say you have a classroom full of kids. I understand that the kindergartners may not fully understand how to clean up. And that's something that I have to teach them. So my expectations for them at the beginning of the year are going to be fairly low. That being said, I will get infinitely more frustrated with my 5th graders if they are just constantly leaving chaos and mess and not putting things back even when I asked. And the reason for that is because there's 2 different sets of expectations based on their age and ability. And I think this translates a lot to the general perception of health and self-destructive behaviors in the general populace. If we see that someone has a genuine mobility issue, we are not going to harp on them to train their legs or something so they can be more mobile, because we understand that that's not how it works. That being said, if we see someone who is taking a disability seat and they are morbidly obese, and so for that, like, bench on the bus, they're taking up a good portion of it, yeah, there is going to be a bit more of a judgment going on, because if, at the very least, you wouldn't be taking up more, even if you still had the mobility issue and you needed to sit in the accessibility seating, you wouldn't be taking up as much space and more people could sit on those benches if you weren't morbidly obese. It's a matter of your consumption of general community resources that's the issue, not so much that you owe people health.
1,000%. That is one of the things that really bothers me about fat phobia, is that so much of it is also rooted in ableism. Even if my illnesses were caused by my fat, it doesn't mean you get to come at me for being chronically ill. You don't get to come at people for being disabled, chronically ill, sick, no matter why they're sick. 1, being fat does not cause any illness. It doesn't fucking matter. And
so this is, again, it feels a little bit like it's arguing semantics. Whether fatness directly causes anything can be up for debate, but that doesn't change the fact that it is a huge contributor to multiple illnesses. With the human body, the general illnesses, there's hardly like one trigger that you can point to and saying that's the culprit. If it were that easy, a lot more diseases would have cures, because the human body is complex and there's multiple facets that are working together to create chaos. The thing is that we know, though, is that smoking, binge drinking, and having a larger body weight can be contributors for bigger issues. And so, in general, this is where I can see a little bit of a morality tie. There is a little bit of a morality tie towards not smoking, not doing drugs, not binge drinking, and not over-consuming food as a tie to morality, only because when you would gain those diseases because of poor choices, because of the poor choices contributed. We know that they contribute. We see that you do them. And therefore you are contributing to that overall outcome, and then taking general public resources potentially away from people that had no say in it. Yeah, that does create a bit of a, this is unfair, you should have done more, that whole sort of thing. They're completely ignoring the responsibility component, the individual responsibility component, which contributes to people's perception. If there is any moral perception, it contributes to that moral perception.
Even if it did, that doesn't take our right as human beings away from us. So I 1,000% agree with this commenter. I am so fucking sick of having to justify being healthy as a fat person and being worthy of respect as a fat person because you're healthy. No amount of weight loss will ever make me a healthy person. I have literally incurable illnesses that medical science has zero cure for. I could lose 250 pounds tomorrow, be at a healthy weight, and I would still be fucking sick.
So I'm not going to deny that they would still be sick. We're going to put that aside. I don't know all of their illnesses. I don't know their conditions. I don't know whether losing weight would directly help with any of those conditions, but I will say that there is the difference here of effort made, and that even if you were still, let's say you still had many of those conditions, many of them would likely be helped with the losing of the weight. And if nothing else, you would be probably more ambulatory and be less dependent on others. You wouldn't necessarily, well, you might still need the accessibility seating. I don't know, there's a perception of effort here that plays into it. And if you don't like that perception of effort, that's fine. I understand that. It is what it is, and you can either ignore it or you can make efforts. But I don't know. I don't care that you're sick of it, I guess. When it comes to FatSapphicBro, I just have I don't have any real sympathy.
And that is the case for a lot of people. Also, there are a fuck ton of thin people who are very fucking sick, who are sicker than me.
My question is, did they do everything in their power to help with their illnesses? Because the thing is that, yeah, there's plenty of people that are sicker than FatSapphicBro. 100%. And most of those people probably get a little bit more compassion because those people aren't constantly crying oppression. Those people do what they can in conjunction with their doctor to manage their symptoms rather than just saying, I can do what I want, I don't owe you shit, but how dare you judge me?
All of us have a value aside from our size and our health status. We do not need to be healthy in order to be valued. We do not need to be thin in order to be valued.
I agree with this, but you can't change the fact it's not necessarily a matter of value, but it's a matter of, again, personal responsibility that people take issue with.
People are valued as they are. Thank you for adding this. I super agree.
Alright, we're just gonna move on because it just seems like them playing Oppression Olympics again.
This person asks, thoughts on smaller trans people buying larger sizes due to dysphoria. Should we still not, or does it depend? I personally think that if you're just buying like 1 or 2 sizes up so that you have a little bit more room in your clothing, and especially because it helps, hide curves or hide a lack of curves or whatever it is you're trying to go for because of dysphoria, I think that's totally, totally valid. I don't have a problem with that at all. It's really just the people who are doing it to be, like, cute and trendy.
And see, this is where it pisses me off. You have no idea why people buy the clothes that they buy. And we've gone into this, and I'm sorry, but I really, FatSapphicBro seems to deem themselves as the arbiter of the moral right. Like, the moral justice, moral correctness, they clearly view themselves as a point of authority on morality, which is just fucking ridiculous. People can buy larger clothes for a variety of reasons, and quite frankly, it's none of your fucking business. If people do it for an aesthetic, that's their fucking right. And I don't think that there's necessarily a morality tied to that. If you want to buy something for an aesthetic, that's your choice. If you want to buy it to hide something about your body, that's your choice. And then there's those that just buy it not because they're fat, but because there's a part of their body that is larger and needs to be dressed as such. We've talked about broad shoulders. I almost always have to go up a size, sometimes 2 sizes bigger than I really need, because my shoulders are broad. And some of you have also had this issue. There are some people that are exceptionally tall and have to buy sizes, like finagle sizes, so that way it fits them in the area that they need the most. You don't have any right to criticize, interrogate, or judge these people any more than they judge you for how they choose to dress. And it's this sort of thing where it's like, I don't see how you can expect allyship while simultaneously condemning every other thing that everyone else does.
You know, those of us who either deal with dysphoria or sensory issues where you can't have your clothes fitting too tightly, those are valid reasons to get clothing that is a little bit bigger. So, yeah, I hope that helps.
I hope that helps, because I'm the authority and I'm going to just tell you the right and wrongs of buying clothes larger than the bare minimum size that you need. Fuck you. Okay, so this is part of an ongoing series of TikToks that they're doing around this guy that seems to be... I'll admit there seems to be some, like, dangerous diet advice going on. I haven't seen a whole lot from them, but it seems there seems to be an unhealthy element here. FatSapphicBro's caption says, "This is an eating disorder." The caption says, "Another fasted check-in. You're literally destroying your body. If you ever end up with cancer, your body won't survive. This is harmful. Stop encouraging eating disorders." This is how he makes money too, by teaching people how to have an ED. Truly awful, absolutely evil. And the thing is that I don't necessarily agree with what this person is doing. That being said, I don't have a strong opinion because I haven't watched many of their TikToks, so I don't know if FatSapphicBro's interpretation of what's going on is correct. We are going to function as though it is correct for the sake of argument. And for this, I say, I don't see how you can get so much on this person with the shit that you pull. You tell people to not listen to their doctors. You say that all forms of weight loss are basically... all forms of intentional weight loss are essentially wrong, even if it's done for the sake of health. And you put forth your own medical advice, even though you are not a doctor. Don't you think that is also dangerous? No, of course you don't, because you believe you are always right. For me, this is a bit of a pot calling the kettle black, just from the opposite side of the spectrum. And I just want to make note of that.
This person asks, do you have any trouble getting proper care because of medical fat phobia? Because fuck, it's so hard being fat and chronically ill. Yes. I talk about this from time to time because it comes up a lot. Fat phobia kept me from seeing doctors from like the age of, I don't know, 17 until my mid-20s. And because of that, I ended up more disabled than I probably would have been had I been able to access care sooner. But so frequently when I would access care, all I would get was lectures about my weight and absolutely zero help in any other aspect. And so it stopped being worth the trauma to me because I couldn't get any support that I actually needed.
This is one of those things where, like, don't get me wrong, I understand the struggles of doctors not taking you seriously and blaming it solely on, like, this one thing, in this case, weight, even when there's other factors at play and an issue that genuinely needs help that can be that should at least be looked at before the weight loss thing is a requirement, or even, like, in conjunction with the weight loss aspect of it. When it comes to FatSapphicBro, though, I can't help but wonder how... I mean, they talk about all these different conditions that they have, and I'm sure they've listed them out at some point. I don't know what they all are, but I can't help but think, given that they are over 400 pounds, that yes, some of their conditions would probably be helped if they lost some weight. Like, not, I don't know. I think that also this, like, I didn't go to the doctor from 17 to mid-20s because I couldn't deal with, like, the trauma of being talked to about my weight. And to me, it just kind of reminds me of some family members that didn't go to the doctor because they were afraid of what the doctor was going to say. And later found out that some of these family members were in fact not taking care of their conditions the way they were supposed to, or were, like, heavily using hard drugs. And that stuff is, of course, going to show up somewhere during the doctor's visit. And I can't help but wonder, I'm like, were you afraid of being traumatized, or were you afraid of being held accountable for the choices that you've made? Like, it's not always the case. I want to be clear, it's not always the case, but I think there are plenty of times when it is the case where you just don't want the doctor to call you out on your bullshit, you know?
Just stopped going to doctors. Then I became chronically ill. Then I finally found an incredible doctor who was a naturopathic doctor, but also was able to prescribe. And they really changed my life. And I was able to finally get access to care and then start learning enough about my illnesses to be able to advocate for myself. Now, I still deal with medical fat phobia all the fucking time. But I have learned a lot of ways to manage it, including pushing back against doctors. And I think that I intimidate doctors because I know more than them a lot of the time.
Are you fucking kidding me? Are you, because I know more than them a lot of, honey, you're not intimidating doctors. I think they just don't want to deal with you a lot of the time. Holy fuck, the arrogance. It's the arrogance for me. I mean, the fucking audacity here. I just... FatSapphicBro is the one that can most honestly, like, most often stun me into a lack of ability to even verbalize my thoughts because they are so fucking outrageous.
Especially around fatness, and I can cite articles and things like that. And so it's a little bit easier, but it's only easier because I've learned to advocate for myself, and the brunt of all of that falls on me. So it's kind of shitty because, like, while yeah, I deal with less fat phobia, medical fat phobia, I still deal with it. And it's really just because I push back against it a lot. Doctors really look for people who are easy to push over, and they will intimidate you, and they will threaten you, and they will make you feel like they are in charge of your care, but they're not. You are. You are the one who has to take care of yourself every day. And so, yeah.
This is a lot of demonizing of doctors that I feel is incredibly unfair. Like, I'm not going to say there aren't bad doctors out there, because there are, but I think the vast majority of doctors do the best they can. Like, medicine isn't a perfect science. There's a lot of estimation and, for lack of a better term, guesswork that can go into trying to figure out what's wrong with someone. It's not like each disease has, like, singular symptoms that can be easily identified. There's a lot of overlapping symptoms. There's a bunch of there are some tests that can help, like, distinguish one from the other, and then some it's a lot harder. And I think that this kind of acting like you know more and demonizing doctors is a form of fear-mongering in itself for your audience, and I hate that so many people listen to you.
Okay, I just want to preface this video with, Beast is a mutual of mine, and I did ask them if it was okay for me to use their comment as a teaching moment, and they gave me the go-ahead. So, their comment says, someone has been drinking too much of that diet culture Kool-Aid. Yes, I agree. The person that we're talking about is somebody who has definitely bought into diet culture and fat phobia and spreads that garbage. But the reference for drinking the Kool-Aid in the last, like, 3 or 4 years, I learned is a very problematic reference. Now, it's referencing the Jonestown Massacre, which, for those of you that don't know, was a whole big cult thing. There was a cult leader, and there were a ton of people that got convinced by their cult leader to participate in a mass unaliving. And while a lot of people think that they made a conscious choice to, quote, drink the Kool-Aid, the reason they say that is because it was a poison that was mixed with Kool-Aid, like a mixed drink, and it was given to everybody, including children. And the reason that it is problematic to make that reference is that people think that they had a choice, but there's a couple of aspects to this. One, you don't really have a choice when you're in a cult. One could argue that you are quite literally brainwashed and that you are no longer consenting to things. So you can't really consent in this capacity because the whole power dynamic is thrown off. But it's not just that. There were people who did not want to do it, who were forced to do it. And I think the most horrific part is the fact that people forcibly gave this to children. Those children did not get a choice in that. They had no autonomy in that situation. They didn't even get to like choose to be in that cult, even though if you know enough about like cults, you don't always choose to be in a cult. And so to use that reference, it's not really a great reference because these people, a lot of these people and all of the children were very much victims. They were not, consenting participants in this. So it's better not to use that phraseology just because of where it's rooted. I hope.
I'm actually very curious. So I included this because, okay, a little bit of background. My mom was really into like the history of these different cults when I was a teenager. So I saw a whole documentary on Jonestown when I was like 14. And there was actual video footage of them taking those like oral syringes and forcing the kids with the Kool-Aid, and then an actual syringe where they would like literally chase down people that were running away from it and then go and stab them with the Kool-Aid to poison them. Like, it was pretty bad, but I don't know if that, I don't know. Sometimes I have a hard time saying that I have a hard time with just because the roots of a phrase are, like, may have some issues with it. I don't know if we should do away with the phrase altogether, because the phrase itself, when we say drinking the Kool-Aid, there were actually a fair number of people that were true believers of it. And while you can't be brainwashed by a cult, I don't think that necessarily takes away a level of autonomy that quite a few of them had with agreeing to this. People do weird shit, and I don't know. Like, I think that saying someone's drinking the Kool-Aid does signify, though, that you were so brainwashed by something that you did something that was harmful to you. So I'm very curious as to your perspective on the concept, because FatSapphicBro, I feel, tends to make everything with even a hint of negative background they deem as problematic, as to where I think that sometimes a problematic past to a phrase can add greater nuance to the phrase itself. And I think that to do away with the phrase itself does away to a certain extent with the like representation of what Jonestown was, and fewer people would necessarily, because if you say drink the Kool-Aid enough, a lot of curious people will look up where that came from and learn about Jonestown. As to where to do away with the phrase and essentially censor it from your vocabulary takes away that connection and prevents people from seeing into this and learning about just how dangerous cults can be. So, I don't know, I think that there's two sides to this. I tend to fall on the side of I would prefer this sort of thing kind of remain in the public consciousness, even if it's just through this phrase, than for it to be hidden and for people to forget. But that's my view. I would like to know your perspective. Granted, I don't know a huge amount about Jonestown. I did watch that documentary when I was like a teenager. I've probably forgotten a lot of it. The thing that always stuck with me, though, and it's one of the things that made me that, and believe it or not, the King of the Hill episode where Luann got like indoctrinated into a cult. those made me kind of, seeing those at a young age, at an impressionable age, kind of made me more sensitive to like those types of people. And I think it actually saved me once from this group on campus that just gave me some weird vibes and later turned out to be a cult. So I think that there's like some benefit from, there isn't a whole lot of cult literacy in our cultural zeitgeist. That's general knowledge, and I think that this is one of the few things that can connect people to the history of cults and why they're dangerous. I don't know. I have a different perspective on this, and I would like to hear your perspective too. Because I'm just one of those people that I don't think that everything that has a bad past should be censored.
Remember when we talked about how former fat people are the most fat phobic? Let's check it out.
However, there is a delusion being formed in the obese community, especially with body positivity, in this fat phobic perspective. Small seats at an airplane, not having all the inclusive sizes at amusement parks. The reality is, being obese has its shortcomings and frustrations. But at the same time, for the extreme majority, obesity is a lifestyle problem, and you can change it.
First of all, we don't describe people as obese. We don't pathologize body size. Just like we don't call really tall people morbidly tall, we don't call people morbidly obese or obese. It's gross.
Okay, so they just are not understanding the term morbidly obese. It's very hard. I'm not entirely sure it's possible, but even if it is, it's extremely rare for someone to be morbidly tall, because what that would signify is that someone is so tall that it increases their chance of premature death. Now, it is much easier to get morbidly obese, meaning that you are so fat that it statistically increases your chance for premature death. Obese is also a descriptor, and I know you prefer the term fat, but for the vast majority of people, the term fat is still a derogatory term. And so obese would be the more clinical, safe term. If you don't like it, that's fine. But I don't think that it's necessarily a matter of pathologizing people. I think that obese has a pathology connected to it, but it's also become the kind of neutral term for when describing someone's weight in the cultural and general populist perspective.
Also, just because you had issues with being fat and hated yourself into weight loss doesn't mean the rest of us do. Is every fat person meant to be fat? No. Are some of us? Yeah. I hit 200 pounds before I got to high school. I also hit 5'7" in like 6th grade. Also, a lot of us have medical conditions that literally make weight loss damn near impossible, and pushing weight loss instead of treatment of the genetic and incurable illnesses we have is fat phobia, and it's systemic, and it's a systemic problem. And systemic fat phobia does include things not being accessible to us, but it also includes being denied treatment from doctors until we literally fucking die and then have our deaths blamed on being fat instead of the fact that our doctors wouldn't do life-saving surgeries on us or what have you, or would deny treatment.
This is a very cynical take on doctors. I've already acknowledged that there is a kernel of truth here in terms of medicine and not taking a look at things that eventually lead to like stage 4 cancer and that sort of thing, and that's an issue. But this refusing to perform life-saving surgeries on us, I feel, is a very cynical and disingenuous take, because there's more like, it's not just you're too fat, therefore I'm not going to do the surgery on you. It's like you're so fat that it increases the likelihood that you'll die on the operating table, or that you won't have a successful recovery. Like there's multiple factors that go into someone saying, I need you to lose the weight to have the surgery, due to anesthesia or recovery, or even on the operating table and not dying. Like there's reasons why, and just because you don't know them doesn't mean that the doctor is maliciously just refusing surgery for you.
And medications because of our size. Also, I'm not body positive, I'm fat positive. We like being fat. Get over it. Just because you hated being fat doesn't mean the rest of us do. Just because you had issues or couldn't do things when you were fat does not mean that the rest of us have those problems. There are plenty of us who are very fucking fat who have no problems.
They speak as though that's them when just in a I didn't cover it because I didn't really feel it was necessary, but now I feel the need to mention it. But they were talking about how they had to crowdfund a wheelchair because when they go out, they can't stay on their feet. And that wheelchair was falling apart, so they were crowdfunding for a new wheelchair. I don't know how long it had been since they had gotten their first wheelchair, but they need bariatric wheelchairs because of how fat they are. And yet you say you have no problems. Like, you may not have an emotional problem, which I still find questionable, but let's not pretend that it doesn't impact your life at all.
You're clearly not educated on this topic. I present this
condescension. I fucking hate it.
The research on this constantly. I am highly educated in this because I have read and continue to read a shit ton of the actual research on this stuff, and I present it for my followers. So try to educate yourself.
I can't. I gotta end it here. This is why I think I can only do FatSapphicBro. It's like the only video that I do for the week because I'm fucking exhausted with the bullshit that they spew. I am fucking exhausted with the misinformation that they spread, and I am fucking exhausted with their bad takes. And we got through 22 days, and we are still in 2021. And for our year in the TikTok, so it's going to be much longer than a single year that we look at FatSapphicBro. But I think if there was one person that was worth looking at for longer than a year, it's probably this person. There's just so much to unpack with them, and I'm quite frankly exhausted, so I'm going to leave it there. In terms of just like general life stuff, I do want to say I think I've nailed down that I'm going to do live tweeting for my 600-pound life on Sundays most of the time, with the exception of like holidays, in which case I might move it to Monday. Like if it's like President's Day or MLK Day was a day I think I did on Monday. I'm considering also covering them on Wednesday nights since the new season of My 600-Pound Life is going to start. I don't know if this video will make it up before the first one, but check my Twitter. It's at hidingallthings. And I'll try to see if I can remember to post a link in the description. I'm really bad at remembering that. But I'm going to try to remember and post it in the description. And if this is posted after Wednesday, check and see if I covered them. If I did, I'm going to try to make it a regular thing. I haven't nailed down a time for any of these yet. So the timing tends to be a little all over the place. I'm still figuring out, do I prefer mornings or afternoons? It seems to kind of depend on the day. All I can say is that it would be either Sunday or, in the case of a holiday, maybe Monday, maybe both days. Those are some of the things that I'm still kind of working out. And this would be something that I may even continue after I finish all of the year in the TikToks and just continue on my Twitter. Because it's kind of fun to do live tweeting, and I enjoy putting like my perspectives out there. The only thing I will say is that with my Twitter, you're also going to see when I'm not live tweeting, I'm posting stuff for sweepstakes because I like sweepstaking on the weekends. It's something else that I do. So just be aware of that. And the rest of the time, I'm going to talk about Otome games. So if that is not your thing, you can leave now and you're not really going to miss anything. But I finished Cupid Parasite. Gil's route fucking sucked. I hated Gil. Gil sucked. I hate him. I fucking hated him. Raul was surprisingly fun. He was still far from my favorite person, but he wasn't as bad as I thought he would be. Alan was fucking amazing. I love Alan, and I don't think he deserved to be Mania. I think Gil should have been Mania, and Alan should have been Agape. And then finally, the secret route, which didn't feel like... It felt... some people said that that was supposed to be the true route. I don't think that that was meant... It was always categorized as a secret route, not a true route. And while most of the time secret route means true route, I don't think that this was that case for this game. I felt like this was more like a side story. because they changed so much about the general framework of the story that was so different from the other 5 guys that it didn't really feel like you could compare the two. The Secret Route guy was fun. He was fun to watch. It was fucking hilarious. He was a bit of a coward. Not really my type of guy, but I enjoyed his route nonetheless for the entertainment value it provided. The Sailor Senshi-esque event was entertaining. The ending, though, after the ending movie, was a bit of a disappointment. It was a lot shorter than any of the others, and I didn't really feel like there was a connection between the guy and Lynette. And I just want to give, like, because I missed it when it was happening on r/Otome Games, and so those threads are now locked, and I can't really participate in conversation, so I want to give my final ranking of the routes here, even though I doubt anyone really cares. And my final ranking is Shelby and Alan are tied. I love them both in 2 very different ways, and I can't pick one of them over the other because I love them both so much. Next would be Ryuki. Following that would probably be the Secret Route, and the only reason why the Secret Route ranks over Raoul is because I felt like the confrontation was better and more interesting. So, Secret Route, then Raoul, and then a distant last is Gil. Gil was creepy. Like, small spoiler for Gil's route, but he has apparently been taking pictures of Lynette sleeping, when she's not looking, when she's eating, without her knowledge of any of this, and he has kept a massive folder of her in his phone. All these pictures that were taken without her consent, and this was used as a way to show how much he loved her. It was weird. And on top of, that's not even the creepy thing, though. The creepy thing for me was when he kept referring to her as a baby bird and was kind of infantilizing her in a lot of ways. But then he was the thirstiest guy of any route. Like, he was constantly horny for her. Like, it was, the infantilization coupled with horny is just a big ick for me. I cannot. But, for anyone who stayed, thank you for listening to me talking about Otome games. I take a mandatory week break between finishing a game and starting a new one because when I spend a long time in a story, I feel a need to kind of decompress and not jump directly into another story and get obsessed with that one. And I like to kind of sit on it and reflect it a little bit and let the initial, oh my god, that was so good and I'm sad that it's all gone now, kind of deflate some before I start a new one. I'm probably going to start what I think will be the shortest game that I currently have available, which will be My Butler. But I also bought Amnesia Later X Crowd. Oh, my dog has discovered me. I also bought Amnesia Later X Crowd because that was about to be sold out everywhere. And then I finally was able to buy also Code Realize Guardians of Rebirth, I think was the name, and it's supposed to be the original one, but for Switch. So I have a shit ton of games to start. So I'm going to start with My Butler, and then I'll switch to one of the physical releases that I have. I don't know which one I'm going to play after My Butler, but yeah, that's for any of my Otome pals out there. If you've played Cupid Parasite, I would like to know your final ranking. I would also like to know why one of the guys is your favorite, and what you generally thought about the game. So, thank you for watching. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you next time.